video, we'll be discussing business processes and decision making, which is covered in Chapter 2 of your textbook. But before we begin, I should once again remind you that these videos are not a substitution for doing the assigned readings. I will summarize and expand on many of the ideas in these readings, as well as add new examples, but some topics may be omitted for brevity's sake. So before watching this video, I recommend reading Chapter 2. We also have an optional reading this week, Knowledge Extension 2, which covers Business Process Modeling Notation, or BPMN for short. We won't be using these types of diagrams in this course, nor will you be tested on them, so feel free to read this knowledge extension if you're interested, but don't feel obligated to. We also have some MyLab MIS homework for this chapter. Remember that MyLab MIS is not part of your grade, but for studying purposes, although I still highly recommend that you do them each week. So let's get into it. Imagine for a moment you're walking down Western Road here on campus and decide to stop at Barakat for lunch. For those that are not familiar, Barakat is a Lebanese restaurant with stores in London and Sarnia that is known for its shawarma and kebabs. You order your falafel bowl, you sit down to eat, and you think to yourself, how did this all get here? I don't mean how did it get from the order counter to where you're sitting now. You haven't lost your short-term memory. But rather, how did all of these parts of this meal get here? The plastic cutlery, the paper bowls, the chickpeas or the falafel, or maybe even the pitas. How did they get to the restaurant, turned into your meal, and eventually put on your plate? How did they know how many plastic forks, for example, to buy? How do they know how much garlic sauce to make today? And who's coordinating all of these decisions? All of these processes had to come together just right and just at the right time to create your lunch without any ingredients spoiling or the business ordering too many or too few materials. Take, for example, the paper bowls. Even though they won't go bad, if you order too many, you now need a place to store them until they can be used. And there's a cost associated with that, as you don't have unlimited storage room for inventory. Order too few, and you'll run out of supplies, and you'll lose out on potential sales. Having everything come together just in time is made possible through the interaction of business processes. But what is a business process? Well, the textbook definition of a business process is a series of activities, tasks, or steps designed to produce a product or service. They are also sometimes referred to as a business system, although in this course, we'll be sticking to the term business process. But to really explore this, let's take a look at an example. Here we see a diagram from our text that you might be familiar with if you've read Chapter 2. It shows a generic and simplified model of an inventory management business process. And for our sake, we can pretend it is one used by Barakat. These kinds of sales and inventory elements of an organization are often referred to as a supply chain. So for the purposes of this example, we can say this is Barakat's supply chain. The point of all this is to ensure that just the right amount of inventory is ordered, not too much that we might risk spoilage, and not too little that we could lead to a situation where we don't have anything to sell to hungry customers. The part you're probably already familiar with is the customer side of things. This would be where you go up to the order counter, place an order, give a payment, and get your lunch. What you might not be familiar with are all the processes that this triggers behind the scenes. Recall from our first lecture that the most important resource in business is information. And we get data to make information by tracking everything. Every business process in an organization generates data and provides us with an opportunity to collect and track it. Sales are not an exception, and perhaps one of the most important things to track, as it is a big part of the money coming in and the money going out. So part of our process is to track and record a record of the sale. The next part of this process would be keeping track of our inventory. For example, how many paper bowls do we have left? We just sold one, so in our inventory management system, we need to deduct one from the total for the London store. Similarly, when we receive a new shipment of paper bowls from our headquarters, we need to update our inventory and to add a new amount to our records. Now, what is the point of tracking all of this? Well, it's to provide information for making decisions. In this case, the decision we need to answer is, do we need to order more paper bowls? This business process provides the purchasing department, or perhaps just a single manager for a smaller company like Barakat, with the information they need to make the decision based on how many paper bowls we have left on inventory. If the manager feels that more bowls are needed, they can place a purchase order to purchase more bowls from our bowl supplier, and let receiving know to expect them. In some large organizations, this process might even be completely automated, with an information system placing the order automatically once stock reaches a certain low level. Once the bowls are received, or the invoice, depending on the exact details of the process, accounts payable pays the supplier, and the bowls can be shipped to the stores that need them, and the quantity on hand is updated in our database. Now, the point here is not that all businesses follow this exact process. In fact, most businesses likely have their own process customized to their particular business's needs. Rather, the point is that by following a well-developed business process, in this case, an inventory management process, a company can ensure that things that need to happen happen. That is, they happen on time and they happen when they're needed, and that the correct paper trail or data is tracked along the way. As I mentioned previously, this is a simplified model. In reality, there are more than one store. Recall that Bearcat has stores in London and Sarnia, which means that more than one inventory has to be tracked, and almost definitely more than one supplier. After all, they need more than paper bowls to run a restaurant. However, the same principles still apply at all of these stages in the business process. Furthermore, I should point out that this is just one business process for inventory management. Businesses like Bearcat would likely also have processes for paying employees and other business functions. So looking closer at business processes, we find that they are all comprised of the same four basic components, although the exact terminology and definitions may differ between organizations or textbooks you're reading. These components are activities, resources, facilities, and information. Activities transform resources or information from one type into another type by following rules and procedures. This can either be a manual process done by a person, an automated process done by a computer, or a combination of the two. An example would be a manager transforming quantity of paper bowls on hand, which is information, into a purchase order, information of a different type, and sending it to a supplier. Resources are any items of value to the business, including items that are external to the business. This can be things like cash, employees, customers, paper bowls, boxes of falafel, or even suppliers. Yes, suppliers are a resource, and this makes sense if you think about it. It takes a significant effort and time to find suppliers that are reliable, produce quality materials, and do it for a reasonable price. A good supplier has significant value for a manufacturing company. Similarly, customers are also a resource. It takes time and money to acquire a new customer. In fact, it's generally accepted that acquiring a new customer costs up to 4 to 10 times more than keeping an existing one. So it's critically important that you maintain your existing customers because they add value to your company, making them a resource. Next up is facilities. Facilities are structures used in the business process. These can be physical buildings that store or transform physical resources, like a warehouse or a factory, or they can be information systems and databases that store information. Recall that information is a resource. So facilities can be digital in addition to being physical structures. And last, but definitely not least, is information. Activities use information to determine how to transform inputs into outputs. Information is the number one resource for making good decisions for your company, and as such is a key focus of this course and information systems as a whole. As I mentioned before, all business processes create information, or at least they provide the opportunity for information to be created. Whether your company is tracking that data and transforms it into good information is a completely other matter. And before we get into that, let's do a quick exercise. Here again is the diagram for our inventory management example. I'd like you to take a moment to look at this diagram and try to divide it into the four basic components of activities, resources, facilities, and information based on the definitions we just discussed. I'll put up a timer, but as always, feel free to pause the video if you feel like you could use some more time. Okay, we're back. Let's start with an easy one, facilities. Recall, these are the structures in our process. This includes our receiving warehouse and our inventory. Specifically, the structures that stores the inventory as opposed to the resources stored in it, but can also include digital structures, such as our databases. Now let's consider resources. These are items of value to the business, such as goods and money, but it can also include things like suppliers, customers, and employees. Information is what activities use to transform inputs to outputs. In this case, this would be things like the order, the quantity of items in the inventory, the purchase order, shipping invoice, and sales information. Now, activities is a bit of a tricky one on this diagram, as it's not clearly shown. Rather, we see the actors that would be performing the activities. This would be things like the cashier transforming an order and payment into a customer's meal, a manager transforming inventory information into a purchase order, or accounts payable transforming a shipping invoice into a payment for a supplier. So before we did that activity, I mentioned business processes provide the opportunity to create good information. But what makes information good or bad? First, let's review what information is. We covered these definitions in our Introduction to Business lecture, but let's quickly take another look. Data is simply recorded facts or figures without any context, while information is data presented in a meaningful context or processed to provide a meaningful context. However, this is not the only definition of information. We can also define information as simply processed data. We do something to our data to produce meaningful information, such as calculate a sum, average, or other operation. We could also simply define information as a difference that makes a difference, a term first coined by psychologist Gregory Bateson, currently shown here on the screen. By this he meant, if you get new information and it does not make a difference to your decision, is it really information? After all, that's the whole point, to create information to guide in our decision making. And that brings us to the question, what makes information good? Or, what are the characteristics of information that makes a difference? The first characteristic is accuracy, and this is somewhat obvious. If the information is false or incorrect, it will not lead us to the correct decision, or even worse, it may lead us to the wrong one. This means information must be based on correct and complete information and processed correctly. For example, if we had a daily sales record in our database as day, month, year, that is, the dates are formatted as day, month, year, and we wanted to find the total sales in December, but we incorrectly processed the dates as formatted to be month, day, year instead, we would have created information that was useless to us because it is not accurate. A similar issue could happen if the amounts were in different currencies, but we processed them in dollars, for example. The key here is to always check the results your information system is giving you, and ensure they make sense. This is also a great personal skill for your assignments. When working on an Excel sheet or the results of an SQL query in your assignment, think critically about the data you are getting back. Just because there's no error reported does not mean that the result is correct. The data could be inaccurate. The next characteristic is timeliness. For information to be useful, it needs to arrive in time to make a decision. For example, if you want to calculate how many paper bowls you need to order next month based on the numbers used in the current month, but you only have figures for a year ago, that's not going to be very useful, as the information is not timely. Next up is relevance, and there are two aspects to this. Information needs to be relevant to both context and subject. To build on the last example, if we wanted to estimate the number of paper bowls we needed for our London store, but got information of soda sales, for example, this would not be helpful, as is not relevant to the subject, which is paper bowls. Similarly, if we got a list of how much we spent on paper bowls last month for all stores, rather than just the London store, this would not be as helpful, as the number of bowls used in the London store last month is what we need to calculate what we need next month. That is, it's not relevant to the context. Information should also be just sufficient for its purpose. For example, if we wanted to know the closing stock price of TELUS on April 12th, 2022, what would be more helpful? This giant table containing all of the stock values for TELUS in the last year? It's quite big. Or simply the one figure. TELUS closing price on April 12th, 2022 is $33.41. I think it's pretty clear that if we just want that number, having presented like this is a lot better than getting a massive table of all the closing, opening, and average prices like that for a whole year, because we can find the information faster and aid our decision right away. Knowing what information to ignore can sometimes be just as difficult as knowing what information you need. Lastly, information must be worth its cost. If you have to spend $1,000 to learn how to save $800, in reality, you just lost $200 before even making a change or decision. Information systems cost money, not only to develop and create, but also to maintain and train employees to use. Sometimes the cost of information systems can't justify the value it brings to a company. This is why it is so important to not use technology for technology's sake and understand the value your information system brings to your business and balance that value with the cost to create and maintain it. I've already mentioned that business processes generate information, and this information is important for a number of reasons. It lets us know when we need to make payments for goods and services. It helps us keep track of what we've delivered and what has not been delivered. It keeps our inventory up to date. But information can take us beyond just collecting facts. Information becomes even more useful when we start using information to manage business processes themselves. This brings us to Business Process Management, or BPM for short. BPM is a field of management that promotes the development of efficient and effective processes through continuous improvement and innovation. Essentially, what this means is that we can use information about the business process itself to better manage and improve that process. The better you are able to understand business processes, the better you'll be able to successfully manage and improve the process. So once again, information is the most important resource for effective management of your business. Moving on to the automation of process activities. Recall from our first lecture, that'd be the Chapter 1 lecture, that the 5-component framework for an information system includes hardware, software, data, procedures, and people. Hardware and software are the computer components, and procedures and people are the human components. But we can also look at this in terms of actors and instructions. The components on the outside, hardware and people, are actors. By that I mean they can take some action in the system. In the Bearcat example, the customer was an actor. They took an action by placing an order. Similarly, the manager took an action by creating a purchase order, when the number of paper bowls in the inventory management system, for example, were running low. Moving inward by one component, we have software and procedures. These are the instructions that actors follow. Software are the instructions for hardware to follow, while procedures are instructions for people to follow. For example, when the paper bowl inventory was getting low, the manager followed a procedure for creating a purchase order and buying some more bowls. Lastly, data is the bridge that joins the human and computer components of an information system together. Now, when we look at this in terms of automation, we can see that when we take an activity and move it from the right-hand side, that is the human side, to the left-hand side, the computer side, we get automation. In the Bearcat example, a manager follows a procedure to order more paper bowls once the inventory looks low. This would be a manual activity on the human side. If we were to take this responsibility from the manager and instead create software that allows hardware to automatically order more bowls once inventory reaches a certain level, this would be moving the activity to the computer side and thus automating it. This could potentially free up the manager to do other tasks that might create more value for the business than filling out purchase orders. Now let's explore the idea a bit further, looking closer at the information systems involved in each part of this example. First, let's take a look at counter-sales. Back 60 or 50 years ago, being a cashier was a far more tedious job. You had to manually input the price of each item into the cash register based on a sticker attached to each item, or maybe even worse, the weight of the item, and then you look it up in a table, and then you know how much per kilogram to enter into the cash register. In modern times, the cashier job has been largely automated. In the past, this automation was mostly through barcodes, scanners, and the computerization of point-of-sale systems that enabled the cashier to do their job faster and more efficiently. However, more recently, we have started to see full automation with self-checkouts. Self-checkouts allow the customer to complete their in-person order without even needing the assistance of an employee. For the business, this means less costs spent on employee salaries, or that those employees could be reassigned to more valuable tasks. What made this role ideal for automation? Well, cashiers tend to be low-skilled level positions with high turnover. This is a problem for the company, as recruiting and training new employees, even for low-skilled positions, has a high cost compared to retaining your existing employees. Making the point-of-sale system simpler and easier to use by automating many of the tasks reduces training time, and in turn, this lowers the training and recruitment cost. Bringing this back to information systems, we can see that most of the activities have been moved to the computer side from the human side. And we also get an added advantage of automating the inventory management system as well. As an item is sold, the point-of-sale system automatically reduces the number recorded in the inventory in our database, and it may even trigger a process to order more of that item. I should point out that this kind of automation may not be appropriate for all businesses. The cost of automation must always be balanced with the value it brings. For example, customers have mixed feelings about self-checkouts, and may simply refuse to use them, or poorly made self-checkout systems could constantly cause issues, which in turn cause longer checkout times and longer lines, completely eliminating their benefit. Freshii, a Canadian fast food restaurant, has been experimenting with a different style of self-checkout systems that does not replace the cashier, but instead outsources them to reduce salaries and get more efficient use out of their cashiers, as they can be used in multiple stores at once. However, this move has faced significant media backlash. Let's take a look.
Freshii is coming under fire, with some people even boycotting the chain for its unorthodox hiring methods, which include replacing real-life employees with a virtual cashier named Percy. If you've stepped into Toronto's Rosedale location, you'll have seen it already. Walk up to the counter and the machine lights up with a worker all the way from Nicaragua, making just $3.75 an hour, who is ready to take your order. Customers and politicians alike have called the move outrageous, and some are worried about the downwards trend in face-to-face customer service jobs. The company argues that it's been difficult to fill cashier positions, and that they're merely innovating to keep up with rising technologies, pointing to Amazon's workflow as an example, which doesn't really help their case. What do you think? Will Percy withstand the test of time?
So now turning from counter sales to the payment system activities in our example business process. This activity is where an accounts payable employee receives an invoice and makes a payment to a supplier once goods are delivered. This activity is a great example of one that we might want to leave as a manual process. We need a human involved to deal with exceptions, such as goods being defective, or receiving an invoice from a supplier, but no quantity actually being received in our warehouse. Creating a computerized system to account for every possible exception in this case might be more expensive and timely than leaving it as a manual process. Furthermore, we may want to have a human involved, as mistakes in this part of the process can be costly. After all, money is directly involved. Once again, look at this in terms of information systems. We can see that most of the activity is left on the human side, making this a manual process. The key again here is that automating this would likely cost more than keeping the process manual. But this is not a hard rule for payment systems in general. Companies with different needs and goals will evaluate the worth of automating an activity differently. For example, a massive retailer like Amazon almost has to have this process automated due to the sheer number of suppliers and how quickly their inventory moves. Finally, now looking at the purchasing activity, this is where a manager creates a purchase order based on the current quantity of items on hand in the inventory. This gives us a nice example of an activity that is a mix of both manual process and automation. The manager doing the purchasing uses an information system to view current inventory levels and order more products by following procedures to create a purchase order. The inventory system automates searching a large database of inventory items and automatically flags items that are low on stock. Creating a purchase order involves selecting a supplier and then using the purchase system to create a purchase order. In this case, we see a mix of automated and manual processes. Searching a large database is tedious and time-consuming, so it was automated. However, selecting a supplier is complicated and somewhat subjective. It's also high risk should the wrong supplier be selected, so it was left as a manual process. There might be a computer program that assists in this selection, such as listing potential suppliers, but the actual decision needs to be made by a human who is actually going out there and evaluating each supplier, getting samples, comparing costs, and so on. Now we're going to move on to talking about decision making, or more specifically, how we can use information systems to support decision making. After all, making correct decisions is the key to running a business, and what you'd be doing most of your day as a business owner. The most important resource for making these decisions, and making them correctly, is information. I know I keep going on about information and it being the most important resource, but it is a critical takeaway from this course and one of the most important things that we cover. We can also think about information as the raw material for making good decisions. This is why information systems are so important for business, as they create and manage this raw material for decision making. First, we need to understand the different kinds of decisions and their characteristics. Business decisions can be understood or categorized in two different ways, by level or by structure. By level, I mean the level at which they occur in an organization. And there's three different types of these: operational decisions, managerial decisions, and strategic decisions. Operational decisions concern the day-to-day operations of a business. This would include things like deciding which items in inventory need to be reordered. Do we need more forks? Do we need more napkins? Or they could be things like deciding which supplier's invoice to pay today. Operational decisions are often supported by transaction processing systems, or TPS for short. This could include things like software that automatically orders an inventory item once it's under a certain level. Managerial decisions concern the allocation and utilization of resources. They have a larger impact on the business than operational decisions, and include things like how much we should budget for maintenance on kitchen equipment next year, or maybe how many employees we should assign to each restaurant. Making these decisions correctly is critical to optimizing the use of your resources. Information systems that support managerial decisions are called Management Information Systems, or MIS for short. Now this might sound a little bit confusing, as we talked about MIS previously as the topic this whole course is concerned about. However, this term can also apply specifically just to these systems. That is, systems that support managerial level decisions. Normally the context will make it clear which one we're talking about. Strategic decisions concern broader scope organizational issues. These would be decisions that set the direction of an organization as a whole, such as starting a new product line, should we open a new restaurant in Waterloo, or should we acquire a specific company. These types of decisions are supported by Enterprise Information Systems, or EIS for short, which aim to create information for high-level managerial or executive employees. An important thing to note is that as we move from operational decisions to managerial decisions, the time frame increases. Operational decisions tend to apply to short-term actions. What inventory do we need to buy today? Managerial decisions involve longer time frames, such as what will the budget for raw ingredients be for the next year? And strategic decisions involve the long term. Their consequences may not be realized for many years. Now we can also talk about decisions in terms of structure. This specifically is referring to the process we use to make the decision, as opposed to the level they occur at in an organization. These come in two varieties: structured decisions and unstructured decisions. Structured decisions have an understood and accepted method for making them. This means that there's already a predefined process or formula that you can use to make the decisions by simply plugging in some data from your business. An example could be a set of calculations for determining how many paper bowls to order based on past sales, or that every kitchen employee is issued the same standard equipment, so we know how much equipment to allocate when hiring a new employee. Unstructured decisions do not have an agreed-upon decision-making method or formula to follow. Examples would include things like predicting the stock market, or evaluating the quality of a supplier's goods while you're choosing a supplier for your business. These type of decisions tend to be more subjective and depend more on the manager making them than a fixed decision-making process. Once again, the important thing to note here is that by structure, we mean the structure of the decision-making process and not necessarily the structure of the underlying subject or problem. Let's try a little activity to make this more clear. Here I have a list of different decisions. I would like you to take a moment and try to divide them into structured and unstructured. I'll set up a timer, but once again, feel free to pause the video if you feel like you need more time. And we're back. So before I give my solution, note that the answers can change a bit based on the organization and the process they are using, but generally this is where they would fall. So deciding how many employees need to work on a given day is likely a structured decision, as we'd be following a predefined scheduling procedure we have created based on past information about how busy the restaurant is on certain days of the week. Deciding where to open a new restaurant and choosing a new product line to create are unstructured decisions, which don't have a simple formula we can use. There may be formulas that would assist in this decision, such as calculating the demographics of the area you want to open the restaurant in, or finding out how many other restaurants are within 10 kilometers. But there's not one formula that will tell us a yes or no to this question. Now there is one here that might have tricked you, and that is predicting the weather. Something like the weather seems chaotic and partly random. But remember, we are not talking about the structure of the subject, the weather. We are rather talking about the structure of the decision-making process. There's generally an accepted process and formula for creating a weather forecast, and the same process is used each day to make a new one. The process of this decision is structured even if the subject is not. One last thing to note before we move on is that there's some correlation between level and structure when we're talking about decisions. Operational decisions tend to be structured, such as following a procedure to schedule an employee for Friday. They tend to be decisions that cover the short term. They're made by low-level managers, and the method for making them is already prescribed. Managerial decisions tend to be a mix of both unstructured and structured. For example, ordering more inventory when it's low. This decision to order more inventory may be very structured. For example, the manager may have been alerted by the inventory management system, and there's a standard process to start. But the actual decision of picking which supplier, or if we even want to keep selling that product now it's run out, may be very unstructured. Finally, strategic decisions tend to be unstructured ones. These set the direction of an organization as a whole and often have few predefined procedures to follow when you're making them. Once again, to be clear, this is not a strict rule and just tends to be what we see in real life and how decisions are made. There may very well be strategic decisions that are structural and operational decisions that are unstructured. We just tend to see most fall into these categories in real life. I should also point out that structured and operational decisions tend to be the kind that are easier and more beneficial to automate. Automating unstructured decisions, on the other hand, can be far more costly and will likely produce worse results. Our last topic in this video will be supporting decision-making, and the steps required to make a good decision. So this table from our textbook does a great job of summarizing the decision-making process in steps, except it omits one key step that you should do before even starting a decision-making process. And that first step is asking yourself, am I even trying to answer the right question? You can make the best decision ever, but if it's a decision about something irrelevant, it could actually be doing more harm than good. For example, let's say you're the manager for a department in a large organization, and your boss comes to you one day and says that your department's productivity is falling behind and your costs are way too high. She asks if you could hire 3 new employees to get productivity up. You might go home and write a report all about how you should hire 3 new employees. However, this could end up hurting your department even more. Hiring new employees introduces costs in terms of salary, training, and recruitment, and they take time to become fully productive. Instead, you could have thought first about if hiring these new employees was the right question to be asking. What your boss really wanted in this case was to increase productivity and reduce costs. Instead, writing a report about switching to a cheaper supplier, maybe, and using the savings to hire a single employee that was responsible solely for maintaining equipment, so your manufacturing employees could be more productive and not have to deal with downtime, would have been an even better outcome, and your boss would probably have been far more impressed. The key here is you have to think critically about, is the decision you're making the right one to even be making? In this case, the question was, should you hire 3 new employees or not? But really, the question should have been asking is, how do I improve the productivity of my department and cut costs? So after we have first asked ourselves if this is a question we should be asking, the next step is intelligence gathering. And this might be best explained by applying it to an example you might face in real life, in this case, buying a new laptop. When you wish to purchase a new laptop, the first step you should take is actually taking a step back and asking, do I actually need a new laptop? Maybe a tablet or smartphone would be a cheaper and better option. If you still think buying a laptop is the right question to be asking, you would then move on to gathering information, or intelligence gathering, on what your options are. What laptops are out there, and what are their features? For example, you might go to Amazon or Best Buy's website and look up current models, prices, and features. The next step would be alternative formulation, where you consider alternatives and create a list of options. For example, maybe you're debating between an Acer laptop running Windows or an Apple MacBook Air. These would be the alternatives that you would analyze in your decision-making process. After creating a list of alternatives and collecting information about each, we'd move on to the next step, choice. In the choice step, we analyze the list of alternatives we created in the alternative formulation step using the information we collected in the intelligence gathering step. In this case, it means analyzing the features and costs of the laptops against our requirements. That is, why we needed the laptop in the first place. For example, let's say we need the laptop for taking CS1032, but we know Professor Servo said that we need a laptop that runs Windows to be able to run Microsoft Access. So we select the Acer laptop instead of the MacBook. This would be our decision, but it's not the end of the decision-making process. Next would be the implementation step, or the make it so step.
Make it so. Sir? Do it.
Where you actually go out and implement your choice. For the laptops, for example, this might be going out to Best Buy and buying the laptop, or ordering it from Amazon. Last, but possibly one of the most important steps, is reviewing our decision. And this is something we often neglect to do in our own personal life, and businesses have a tendency to forget about it as well. To understand if we made a good decision and to improve future decision-making, we need to evaluate the results of our decision. Does this laptop meet our needs? Next time, what will we do differently? Will we still buy Acer or Windows-based computer? Perhaps even the question was wrong to begin with. Maybe what we really needed was a tablet or a phone. The idea here is to enable a process of continual improvement so that each time you make a similar decision, you can do it better the next time. So this decision-making process is actually a cycle. We use what we've learned through the first iteration of the decision-making process to make the next iteration better, and so on, improving each time. So that brings us to the end of Chapter 2 and this video. Your next step is now to watch the Chapter 3 lecture on productivity, innovation, and strategy. So take a break, get some snacks, and then start in on the next video lecture. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.